That's a real academics answer as well. It was about 3 sentences long, so apologies for that. Academics are very good at talking and never stopping talking, and I'm going to not do that today because we've already heard a bunch of interesting stuff. What I'm going to do is, thank you very much, talk for about 10 or 15 minutes basically about what I do for my job. So I am Associate Professor at the University of Birmingham, and I research romance novels. Not just romance novels, also romantic comedy film, basically romance in creative formats. And this is something I think is really interesting. I basically like to think about, what is romance, why do people read it, how does it change over time, and what does that teach us or tell us about society and people and community? And you're going to answer those questions for me later on, I hope. So basically, what is the enduring appeal of romantic fiction? I took this from a book cover, by the way. I thought this was excellent. And I would wear both of those outfits, 100%. So, why should we care about romance fiction, about romantic novels, about kind of romantic comedy? The immediate answer is because romance is back. And I say it's back, but it never really went away for a lot of people. But right now, as you can see from these examples of kind of newspapers, romance readership in the UK in particular, but basically globally, the USA and Australia are kind of 3 of the biggest romance reading markets in the world, 3 of the biggest reading markets in the world. Romance novel reading and sales are higher than they've been since 2012. Can anyone think why romance reading might have been pretty big in 2010, 2011, 2012? Anyone think what might have been published around about that time that people were reading? It was 50 Shades, yeah. So romance reading is as popular now as it was when 50 Shades came out, because everybody read 50 Shades just to kind of see what was going on. So but the romance we have now is maybe a little different to the romance in 2012 and the romance we might have had historically. So when I say romance novel, what do I mean? And I'm going to ask you a question first. If I say to you a romance novel, what does that mean? How would you define that?
Unrealistic.
Unrealistic. Love it. This is great. Okay. Anything else?
Centered on the relationship of people and about the emotions that they're feeling throughout it.
Excellent. Are you an academic? So centered on 2 people and the emotions that they might go through in that. Yes. I saw hands over here.
Oh, a fantasy that you can live through vicariously.
A vicarious fantasy, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, and one for this table, go ahead.
Kind of finding the cliches and possibly turning them on their head and exploring how society can change their ideas about love.
Oh, I like that. So cliched, but exploring those and doing something with those cliches, yeah. And that is that's something maybe romance is doing a little bit. It's kind of rebranding or reworking. How many people here would say that you have ever read a romance novel? Put your hand up if you have.
Younger people in the room, which very much correlates with what we know about romance readership since 2020, basically. So I'm going to give you, you just defined it beautifully. I'm going to give you some definitions that have come from academics and also from romance writers' organizations themselves. So Pamela Regis is an American academic who kind of has a really famous definition that is used by a lot of academics to define what a romance novel is. She actually came up with a whole 8-ingredient formula and says every romance novel has to have this. So she said the romance novel is a work of prose fiction, that's the novel bit, that tells the story of the courtship and betrothal of one or more protagonists. She used to say heroes and heroines, but she changed it to protagonists to incorporate non-heterosexual romance. But largely it focuses on that central couple, and she talks about courtship and betrothal. It won't be a surprise to you that she uses Pride and Prejudice as the basis for her definition of the modern romance novel. The Romance Writers of America is the largest writers' organization of romance novelists in North America, and they say 2 basic elements comprise every romance novel: a central love story and an emotionally satisfying and optimistic ending. Okay, so vicarious fantasy. None of you said explicitly happy ending. However, we want to imagine a happy ending. But emotionally satisfying and optimistic ending, there's your happy ending. Finally, I wanted to give you the British author equivalent, the Romantic Novelist Association, because what romance novel means in North America versus the UK is slightly different, and this is one of the things I've been researching. In the UK, we have a slightly broader, I think, understanding or definition of romance that incorporates different kinds of love, and this might be something we want to explore in a creative activity. You know, love doesn't have to be kind of romantic, eros, erotic kind of love. Other kinds of love find their way into British romantic fiction. So this can be fiction that shows a budding romance as one part of the hero or heroine's journey, and that can reflect our own relationships back to us and challenge our preconceptions about what love looks like. So not every romance novel is going to do this, but I really like this definition of kind of the power of romance, maybe, of what romantic fiction could do and could be doing for its readers. This might be something readers are getting from romantic fiction. So, a brief history of romance fiction, particularly British romantic fiction, because arguably the genre, the modern genre, starts in the UK. So, Pride and Prejudice. How many people have seen that TV adaptation, Pride and Prejudice? Yes, okay. The lake wet shirt thing isn't in the book, sadly. But Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, this is seen as the kind of the modern impetus or the kind of modern precursor for what has become a romance novel today. Very, very famous, lots and lots of rewritings of it. Lots of people love this. Slightly more problematic moment in romance's history, and this is what Sadia was saying, everything has a good and a bad side. Romance literature in general has a problematic history also. Has anyone heard of this book or read this book, E.M. Hull's The Sheik from 1919? It was made into a film in 1921 starring Rudolph Valentino and Agnes Ayres. Smash hit film, silent movie. Essentially, this has also been hugely influential in the genre. He's not really ethnically Arab. He's actually a white European posing as an Arab sheikh. And he essentially kidnaps and ravishes this woman, and it's love, and it's great. But often seen as a response, 1919, we're just after the end of World War I, a real crisis of masculinity in the UK at the time, and really seen as a response to what was happening at the time. So what we can see, of course, is romance reflecting the reality of relationships, of gender, of what's happening at the time. And finally, moving up to the present day, I wanted to share these as examples of something I'll talk about a bit more, the kind of diversification of romance. So from something like E.M. Hull's The Sheik, which is problematic representation of North Africa here in particular, but then we're moving into the 21st century, and romance is more diverse than it's ever been, which I'll talk about in a moment. This is what romance looks like today, or is more likely to look like if you see it in a bookshop. Ayesha Malik's Sophia Khan Is Not Obliged is the first book in a trilogy she wrote, which is based on Bridget Jones's diary. It was marketed as the Muslim Bridget Jones. Has anyone read this book? It's really good, actually. And of course, Bridget Jones's diary was itself based on Pride and Prejudice, right? There's that influence coming through. Has anyone read this one, Finding Mr. Perfectly Fine? This is also a great book, but showing an example of a research project I've been working on around Muslim women's popular romance, popular genre fiction. There are lots and lots of examples now of romance that doesn't look like these historical examples. It's not kind of white protagonists, not problematic colonial contexts. We have a different kind of story being told in romance fiction. And I can't talk about British romance without talking about Mills and Boon. You'll see some Mills and Boon novels on your tables, and we'll do some stuff with those in a little bit. But these are the kinds of, when we say romance, a lot of people will think of Mills and Boon, first of all, and they are really, really important. Founded in 1908, so a really old company, but they didn't actually start focusing on publishing just romance until the 1920s, when basically they realized it was going to make them a lot of money, and it was quite cheap. They tend to publish in subgenres, historical, particularly Regency, so kind of the influence of Pride and Prejudice again. Medical romance has always been really popular, doctors and nurses. I think there might be a blue one on the table somewhere, that's the doctor-nurse one. And modern, which is the blue covers, those are the exotic kind of millionaires, billionaires. Millionaires not enough anymore for a Mills and Boon novel, they've got to be billionaires. And one new Mills and Boon book is sold in the UK every 10 seconds. I took that off their website now, so that is every 10, like since I've been talking, they've probably sold like 100, right? So they are still massively popular. So what about romance today? So I was in town at the weekend. This is the big Waterstones in Birmingham. And this, on the mezzanine lower floor, they have a romance section. And this is what it looks like. It's amazing. It's also new. This didn't exist until last summer, I think. So this is an example of how romance is booming.
Like romance as a section didn't exist in the store?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, there was no romance section in the store. And you can see as well, thinking about that Britishness, this says romance, this says romantic fiction, right? So both are present here. And there's some books in here that I would not necessarily categorize as romance. Has anyone read The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo? That's here. There's a book over here called Counterfeit, which is like a crimey kind of novel. So yeah, it's very interesting, the kinds of mix of things that are there. And you might see some books there that you've read or that you recognize. So what might we learn from this? 3 quick things. First off is that romance is more diverse than it has ever been. We have lots of examples of Muslim romance. Anyone read any of these 3 novels? Which one have you read? Red, White and Royal Blue, yeah. Did you like it? Yeah, it's a film now too, actually. The film is not as good as the book, I don't think. But yeah, the book is really, really good. And her second one is great as well. So Red, White and Royal Blue is imagining a potential relationship between the son of the President of the United States and Prince, is his name Henry? Is that his name? Prince Henry of the royal family, basically. It's essentially kind of Prince Harry, but handsomer, I think. So we have a lot of queer romance, which has really grown in the last kind of 10, 15 years. Yinka, Where Is Your Husband? Lizzie Damalola Blackburn is a, I believe, British-Nigerian author, and that's kind of chick lit romantic fiction. And then Amal Awad at the end, they're courting Samira. So much more diversity in romance, right? It doesn't necessarily look like it would have looked even at the time that 50 Shades was published. But a caveat on this, a diversity survey of the publishing workforce, only 13% of the UK publishing workforce, so editors, agents, editorial assistants, only 13% in the survey identified as Black, Asian, or from a minority ethnic group, compared with 18% of the UK population. So while these books are being sold, are being marketed, there is still a lack of representation within the business that makes these books. And we have to put that in context, right? These books are selling, but is it actually making institutional change? Is it making structural change? How do we kind of manage that? So the context is important there. Second, I think, some people think, readers might say, and we can talk about this, that romance models positive, in brackets, relationships, because we don't all have to agree on this. We don't all have to love romance, absolutely. So to compare and contrast, E.M. Holds the Shake. I teach this book because it's interesting, but it's also deeply troubling. And Emily Henry's Happy Place. Has anyone read this book or read any Emily Henry? It's quite nice. So very popular contemporary author, very popular on TikTok. So the hero of E.M. Holds the Shake is probably what... There's a review site called Smart Bitches Trashy Books who review romance novels, and they coined this term the alpha hole. So the alpha hero is an asshole. He's an alpha hole. You can fill in the gaps. So he is an alpha hole. He's terrible. He rapes her and it's just really bad. 2, a contemporary romance novel. This is from a review of this book, that we have multidimensional and relatable characters. Characters who go to therapy and you don't have sex until they find a condom. That is in the book, and whose vulnerabilities often feel like your own. So this is what modern romance looks like now, or an example of it, compared with something from over 100 years ago. In terms of sex, in terms of what the relationship might look like physically, this is a quote from the Sheikh. Her body was aching with the grip of his powerful arms. Her mouth was bruised with his savage kisses. That's fairly typical of kind of these encounters of the time, and quite funny now, I think. Like, we can kind of laugh at that. But from Happy Place, Wind's head droops against my shoulder, his laughter spilling across my skin, dripping down my spine, lighting up my nerve endings as it goes. Now, that might make us feel something a bit different, right? Like, that's a very different kind of sensation or kind of emotion being described here. So maybe romance models relationships, positive or negative. Maybe it gives us something to talk about. Finally, Romance is everywhere. So it is everywhere in this bookshop. It's also on TV. Bridgerton, how many people watch Bridgerton? Right? Okay, so that is huge, multinational kind of successful romance. Those are adaptations of Julia Quinn's historical romance novels. Challengers, the sexy tennis film. I saw that last week. Has anyone seen that? It's interesting. I laughed a lot, but I don't think I should have, I think. I enjoyed the experience, but it might be the worst film I've ever seen. The Idea of You, has anyone seen? I think it's on Amazon. It's a kind of fan fiction-y Harry Styles kind of movie where she is an older woman. I think she's only 14 something, but she ends up dating 19-year-old Harry Styles, basically. So no, it's not. It's not. No, sadly. He did date Olivia Wilde. Yes, he did. It's probably where the fan fiction came from. But the character isn't Harry Styles technically. It's like the equivalent. It's like a fictional band. But apparently it's quite a sexy rom-com. So rom-coms are also back, right? Remember the 90s, all those romantic comedies? Rom-coms are back, but they maybe look slightly different. Bridgerton has got a more... there's no characters of colour in the original books, but of course Shonda Rhimes has done some kind of more racially diverse casting. We have an older heroine in The Idea of You. Challengers has kind of 2 love interests there, so perhaps it's everywhere, but it's also reflecting that diversity or looking slightly different. Okay, but what do you think? So, I have some questions for you, and I'd like you to think about these questions in your tables. Have a discussion. You can build on kind of anything else you have in your mind too. But what is it about romance that people keep coming back to? Romance is huge. It's selling everywhere. Why do people keep watching, reading romance? What might we learn, if anything, from romance, positive or negative? And what would you change about the romance stories that you've come across if you were able to change anything about them? Okay, so I'm going to give you like maybe 5-10 minutes in your tables to discuss this, and then I'll move on to the creative response bit. So just have a chat for now. Feel free to refresh your drinks, and then we'll come back together. And those of you online, feel free to have a chat in a group as well. I think some people might help you sort that. Kind of realizing love stories can show up in a lot of fiction, thinking about things that give us the ick that we don't like in romance. So what I'd like you to do now is basically channel your feelings, your thoughts about romance, but also about love. Like, you can get philosophical with this. I know this is Philosopher's Yard, so, what does love mean? What does romance mean to you? And we're going to get a little bit primary school, and it's going to be fun. It's going to be great. So we are going to cut and stick our own romance poems, our own love stories. You can even make a card if you're in a new relationship and you maybe want to do something nice for your loved ones. Write them a love poem or an anti-love poem. It's completely up to you what you want to do. So what you'll see on your tables are, there's a couple of Mills and Boon novels, and I've gone with Mills and Boon to really give you that kind of stereotypical kind of what we might immediately think of when we think of romance novel. And you should have a kind of slightly newer one and a slightly more old school one too. What you'll also see are 8 photocopied pages. There's 8 novels in the room, and each table has 1 photocopied blown up page from each of those novels. You'll also see some coloured cards, some scissors, and some glue. You can choose any page, or you can share multiple pages on your tables. Choose the page from the romance novel you've chosen. I chose some slightly spicier pages. I chose some declarations of love pages. And there's one with like a dog on it, because I thought it has some good words you might want to get into. And basically cut and stick the words. You've got scissors, cut it up like fridge magnets or like a ransom note. Choose any format you like, cut and stick it however you like, and write back to this particular book, or to how you feel about love, or to an individual person if you want, and craft your general feelings about love and romance using the words of that stereotypical Mills and Boon novel. How far can you go with that language, with that kind of old school purple prose, and what might you come up with? What kinds of questions or answers? So, space to be creative.
What's purple prose?
Purple prose is a phrase that people use for that kind of throbbing member, his turgid manhood. So before you could say cock in a romance novel, basically, they use words like throbbing member, essentially, and that's what we might call purple prose. But romance novels now will say dick, so it's all fine. So we're going to go for a good 30 minutes, maybe 35, so plenty of time. We'll put some music on, it's going to be really chill, and I'm going to come around and see what you're doing. So yeah, feel free to be creative, any format you like, and if you're brave enough, we can share them at the end.